Good morning, everyone. Please be welcome to day 4 of this academy. So this session will take place in English. So if you speak French, you're invited to use your headset for this presentation. Let me take this opportunity to welcome all of you joining this live session around the world. So not only people in the room here, we are 90 participants coming from like 33 countries around the world, but people are also able to connect using our web facilities through our partnership with socialprotection.org. So if you're joining online, please be welcome this morning. So this morning is a special morning because we have the ILO director of the Social Protection Department, Isabel Ortiz. She has been introduced a bit earlier this week. Isabel is not only an expert, but she is your key partner here in the room. She's leading the ILO global team on social protection. This is more than 100 experts around the world, located in Geneva in our regional offices. And this is like, I would say, an open arm for you, because she's leading all of her effort in terms of advocacy. So if at the national level you need some support from the ILO, she's the person that could actually mobilize our team to actually, together with you, move on in the advocacy of social protection in your country. She's also responsible of our technical cooperation aspect. So if you're looking for something a bit more specific, a bit more comprehensive, where we might need like some more analytical work, she's the key person here in the room to let you know what the ILO can do for you. And she's also in charge of research. She's quite involved in capacity building activities. So take this opportunity not only to listen to her presentation, but she will be here for this week. So you might want to connect with her and see how can you engage with the ILO. But for this morning, she will be covering a very important session. This is about fiscal space for universal social protection. How can we finance it? How can we actually step by step move towards a more just and also universal social protection system, increase coverage? So let me stop here because she will tell the story herself. So Isabel, please be welcome once again, and please have a good presentation.
Thank you very much, Charles, and good morning, everybody. And good morning also for those that are watching through online. Okay, let me start by saying why the importance of this topic. Generally, when you talk to governments, everybody thinks that universal social protection is an important thing. We are talking social protection for all, for everybody in society. It's not an opposition from a policy point of view, but what very often happens is that ministries say, yes, we believe this is important, this is priority, but there are no funds for it. So that's why financing is a very important issue, and we have to go to it, because this is not just about making the policy case, it's also about ensuring that there are going to be funds to ensure that social protection is a reality for all people. And I always like to start by this slide as a way of introduction. And what you have here is how social protection systems have been evolving over the last 100 years. The first map you have there, it's from the 1900s. And as you can see, very few countries had any social security or any social protection. Then you have the 1920s, the 1940s, the 1960s. 1960s, you already have the independence of many developing countries, Africa, Asia. And they all, when they become independent, they create a Ministry of Labor and Social Security in charge of develop universal social protection for all. Then you get the 1980s, and the last slide, the last map, is actually correspond to the latest year. We have data, which is 2015. Now, what you see there, it is how, over the last 100 years, is a story of success, how countries have been adding more and more schemes of social protection. And as you see, the colors of the last map are very bright. But still, there are many countries that are not really on the brightest possible color. And this is our generational duty of all of us here today. It is to make sure that this map becomes all full with bright colors. And this is very important to get that sense of mission for all of us, because this is not a fight that depends, on this moment. This is a fight for social justice that was started by our parents and our grandparents. All of them fought through very difficult periods, through wars, through dictators, and no matter that, they were successful to ensure that social protection was extended to more and more people. So today, we need to fight it too, and it's just a different environment, not the one of our parents or grandparents, but a lot of the fight is going to be for financing. And that fight is the one where we're going to talk today. Now, how countries did achieve this, and that's very important for what it comes. Countries achieved universality generally by a mix of social insurance and social assistance. So you get, through social insurance, will deliver better benefits, and this is for those that can contribute and are in an employment situation, and those that are not in an employment situation, then you get social assistance, which is financed from the general budget. And that's going to give us the two keys to mobilize resources. Why I was talking also of a fight? Well, it is because today we have to identify how to finance universal social protection at a time that there is fiscal consolidation or austerity is happening. Now, many people think that this is happening only in Europe, austerity, but this is not correct. Actually, austerity is happening in a majority of developing countries. Just today, today, as we're speaking here, there are 124 countries cutting public expenditures, and the majority, 81, are developing countries. Now, which of you know that your country, they're cutting public expenditures? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, 7. I can promise you there are much more than 7 here. So I advise you may want to check your country in that publication, The Decade of Adjustment, a review of austerity trends from 2010-2020 in 187 countries. You can check your own country there. And what are the typical cuts that are being discussed. And that is important to know, to identify, what is happening and to be able to, in an intelligent manner, argue and successfully win your fiscal space for social protection. Because the key thing is that there are alternatives. Ministries always tell you, oh, it's a bad moment, fiscal deficit is large, it cannot happen, debt is increasing, but there are options there. And that's why we are going to look today. We are going to give you the intellectual ammunition to look forward and to come with the arguments why, what are the avenues that you could explore to identify fiscal space. Now, to start and to understand why, this is an issue of political will, I want to show you government spending choices. And this is how much a government spends overall in the whole budget. And what you see is that some governments actually spend a lot. And these are the ones at the bottom there. Mostly European countries, France, Denmark, Italy, Belgium, Austria, and you see they spend as much as 50% of GDP in all government. That means everything, from civil works, social protection, education, health, you name it. So they spend a lot. And some others are very, very wealthy, but they don't spend. And that will be the case of United States, for instance. And you see United States is between Botswana, Russia, and Eritrea. And this is a question of political will. So in the United States, they think that it's perhaps not so good to have a government spending so much. So therefore, they have much lesser social programs as a result of that. And that's a political choice. Now, political will can be created. And in a way, all of us here do have a role to play there. Because the reality is that by investing more in public investment in social development, actually you do get higher returns to people. So likewise, like governments choose to spend more or less, some governments actually look for more sources of funding and some others don't. That's interesting. So there are a number of options that you can look at that perhaps your government is not looking at. And these are the 8 options that any government has. Even the poorest countries on earth have some of these options. So when people say that they cannot be funded, this is not really correct. Actually, it can be funded and more avenues can be explored. Maybe different timings, but we're going to go through the different options. And these options are all supported by the international financial institutions and by the United Nations. So these are not any revolutionary options. These are options that have been applied by governments for decades. So it's very important to get a flavor of that. So the first one, which is very important for social protection, is to expand social security coverage and contributory revenues. This is expanding contributions. So that way you are going to get many more people incorporated into social insurance. Then the second one is reallocating public expenditures, and we're going to see them all. The third one, increasing tax revenues. That's very important for social assistance, because you cannot finance that through contributions. That has to be financed from the general budget. Then if you're a developing country, you can lobby for increased aid and transfers. You can eliminate illicit financial flows. You can use fiscal and foreign exchange reserves. You can manage debt, that might be borrowing or restructuring debt, opposite situations, depend what is your country. And you can adopt a more accommodative macroeconomic framework. And that means having some tolerance to inflation of fiscal deficits, as many countries do. Okay, so we are going to go through the 8 options, which is the first one is to expand social security coverage and contributory revenues. So it means you have a system of social insurance. How many here have a system of social insurance in your country? Everybody. Everybody has a system of social insurance. All countries do have that, okay? Now, the problem is that very often the social insurance covers a very small amount of people in developing countries because there are very few people in the formal sector. So a way to move ahead with that is to try to bring the more people from the informal sector to the formal sector and ensure that they have a good contract with decent work conditions, and I think that in ILO we work towards that, and we're very happy to support you in that. And then ensure that through these contributions, then you get more access to social insurance, so more people get covered. Now, how you do that? Typically, you expand social insurance to new groups that might be uncovered. It could be fishermen, it could be domestic workers, it could be rural workers. There are micro enterprises. There are many ways to move ahead, and all of them require a bit of a different tailoring the schemes to capture that important set of people. And we have very good experiences. And let me give you an example of innovation. This comes from Latin America and what is called the mono tax. Mono tax is a tax, mono tax. And this is a simplified collection mechanism in which you have a very small tax, a very small social security contribution that gets collected at the same time. And with that, and this is the graph you have there, this corresponds only to Uruguay, but this is also happening in Brazil, in Argentina, and other Latin American countries, and many thousands and thousands of people every year get incorporated into social security because of that. Very simplified mechanism, collection mechanism. So if you're a micro enterprise with 1 or 2 workers, 3 workers, which is very small, and so just paying these, then your workers have access to social security. It requires a degree of subsidy from the government, but it's a well-used subsidy because these people will have access to health and a number of benefits. And if you are more interested, there is a great work done by Fabio Duran, who is also teaching in the academy, on the monotax, and you might want to download it and learn more about this experience. Then we are in the Social Security Academy, and I need to bring your attention towards that. You need to be aware of attacks to social insurance worldwide. And very often, there's a section of the international financial organizations that actually they are suggesting to cut employers' contributions to Social Security. And this is thought with a good intention. The idea is to give employers a fiscal stimulus. So you will cut employers' contributions, and they will have, more. There's limited funding resources, so they think that, we will give them. We cut what they call labor taxes, so that will be the employers' contributions to Social Security, and that manner, they think, then employers will have, more breathing space to keep, their economic activities. Now, the problem is that will be at the cost of Social Security, so that will be very inadequate, okay? And actually, a number of international organizations have backed out of that policy message because it will be really inadequate. So, but you need to be aware. Time to time, somebody puts it in the national debate. It is incorrect. It will be against ILO conventions and recommendations, against United Nations, and you should not let it go. It is very important to have acceptable rate of contributions by employers and workers, and that way contribute to social insurance. Okay, we go to option 2. Option 2 is about reallocating public expenditures, and this is the most orthodox option. When IMF goes to your countries, the first thing they look is this one. How can they, bring expenditure from here to there? That still keeps the fiscal space the same. If you think of the budget as a pie, the pie will be the same size. But what you do is you pick from here and bring it there. And United Nations always likes to talk about using defense or military expenditures for human development. That's a position of the United Nations, and you have some successful cases. Let me give you Costa Rica or Thailand. Both of them reallocated military expenditures towards health. And they are always quoted as, as grand examples by the United Nations. But the reality is this is very difficult. Because now you go to your military, in your country and say, we're going to cut you. And not so easy to do. So, because this is not easy to do, you might look to other options for fiscal space, but still, you have options there, okay? So not necessarily with the military, but though you should try. But there are a number of things to do there. Another one is to eliminate inefficiencies, and we are all for that. No, we want services that are more efficient, and sometimes they are badly implemented and inefficient. So through that, you will get a bit of savings. But I need to point to you, the savings will be very small because you don't get so much savings from eliminating inefficiencies. And the other thing is that they take a lot of time. As you all know, to reform a sector and do it more efficient takes years. So you're not going to get lots of money or very quickly. And the third option, which is there, it is to fight corruption. Corruption is estimated at 5% of global GDP. It's a cancer that societies have, as is unacceptable from any point of view. But that is not so easy to fight, as you always know, because, it's happening for a reason. But, however, society should move, towards fighting that. So, altogether, you might want, if you go through this avenue, what you might want to do is actually to create some unit in the Ministry of Finance, or to work with the Ministry of Finance, to look which might be the high cost and low impact investments, and try to use this money from, sometimes there are investment projects that are extremely expensive, but you don't really know the returns of that. So you might use that for human development and social protection. And as an example, during the Arab Spring in Egypt, they created an economic justice unit in the Ministry of Finance. And that was the purpose of that economic justice unit. They were revising all the investments of the government and seeing which ones actually had a sense for the Egyptian people and which others might be, big elephants that they were, satisfying a few people and did not have so clear social returns. So that can be done. And these are examples. The United Nations, as mentioned, compares military expenditure to health expenditure. In many countries, you have much larger military expenditures than health, so that is not acceptable. There is an important case here, and I need to talk to you, because it's happening in many countries, and it's the use of fuel subsidies for social protection. Now, how many countries here do you know this is happening in your country? The use of fuel subsidies for social protection? 1, 2? There are actually many countries where this is happening. Now, this has a good logic. So, why you should have a fuel subsidy supporting fuel producers sometimes, fuel distributors other times, and instead of supporting people. So the idea to remove that and to work towards, better climate investments is good. However, the problem is how it is done. And I'm going to tell you. So very often what happens, you get an IMF mission, talks to the Ministry of Finance, they decide that this is a wrong, subsidy, and then they think, well, okay, so let's eliminate it, and then let's give a safety net to the poor as a compensatory mechanism. And that is the problem here. There are a number of problems. The first one is the timing. You can reduce a subsidy overnight, immediately. So you just say, it's cut, and this is not happening anymore. But however, to build a safety net or a social protection system takes years to happen. How long does it take? You need to form the unit to do it, train more people, ensure that there are administrators to deliver the program. So what we are seeing all around the world is that subsidies are cut, and these subsidies are universal for everybody in a society, and then suddenly, boom, there's nothing in place. So people are left with no compensation. So the issue of timing is very important. So this needs to be, you need to be aware of that. The second one is that very often, because that's the way the IMF thinks, they think that you compensate the poor and this will be sufficient, but this is not true. This is actually punishing the middle classes. And in developing countries, the middle classes are very low income. These are not wealthy middle classes like in Europe. They are middle classes in developing countries have low incomes and live very modest lives. Now, they were benefiting of fuel subsidies because they were universal. But suddenly you remove the fuel subsidy, transport costs become much more expensive, food costs become much more expensive because the goods are transported to the cities, so everything rises, the price. And however, if you do a safety net only for the poor, these middle classes are punished because they don't receive anything in compensation. So this is a wrong policy. The fuel subsidy should not be used for a targeted safety net for the poor. A fuel subsidy could be removed and be used for a universal social protection system for all, including the middle classes, who are going to be very affected. And that's how you need to pitch it in your countries when you see that this happens. This is the opportunity, it's a great opportunity to use these funds, but to build a social protection system that will be universal for all, including middle classes. And the third thing you need to be aware is the magnitude of these fuel subsidies. You are talking of huge amount of money. Let me give you an example. Ghana. Is anybody here from Ghana? Okay. This is an example from your country. So what happened there, actually, you did have a huge fuel subsidy, estimated in 2013 at $1 billion. And then the government, under the advice of the IMF, what they came and they said, okay, so let's do a safety net for the poor to compensate for that. And they created, well, they expanded the existing LEAP program. You know the LEAP program, huh? But this is an ultra program, a safety net program, ultra targeted to the poor only. That cost $20 million per year in 2013. So here you have 20 million and $1 billion. So where did the rest of the money go? See, so it was used for, a number of other things. But the key thing to understand there is that, you see, it's a lost opportunity, because this $1 billion could have been used, or part of it, could have been used to develop a universal social system for all people in Ghana, not just a very targeted program to the poorest. So still, it can be discussed. So, it's there, but now becomes more difficult to move that. So if this is happening in your country and you are having your fuel subsidies removed, it's the moment to be ambitious. Propose a universal social protection system for everybody, because the funds are there. Okay, option three. Remember, there were 8 options. We're now in number 3. And this is about increasing tax revenues. And this is the typical option that you will finance more social assistance. That means schemes for those that cannot contribute to social security because they are poor, or they don't have a formal job. And here you have many taxes. See, there's not one type of taxes. There are many, many. And I'm going to have a list there, but there are more than those. And there are income taxes, corporate taxes, including taxes to the financial sector, taxing natural resource extraction, minerals, property and inheritance taxes, tariffs, imports and exports, and consumption taxes, or VAT. They are ordered in a way that the most progressive is the top one and the most regressive is the lower one. Now, you will know what progressive and regressive is. Progressive will be that it will be more redistributive and it will have a positive social impact, because it will be some redistribution from those very rich to the poor. And regressive will be the opposite, that actually that measure actually brings money from the poor to the wealthy. So here, what are the key lessons? The key lessons: you want to try taxes that are, well, taxes that will not be an obstacle to growth, so you need to do that. If you put an excessive tax that cannot be done overnight, will have bad impacts. But you need some adequate level of taxation, so there is progressive and entails redistribution from the wealthy to the rich, for many reasons, but to start with, because inequality is growing all around the world, and it is because these measures are not happening. So you will use income taxes, corporate taxes, including taxes to the financial sector. And here there have been so many wonderful examples in recent years. Let me give you an example. In Brazil, over the earlier administration, for more than 15 years, there was a very small tax to the financial sector, and this allowed a great expansion of social protection in Brazil. And now you need to call your attention that the financial sector is generally not taxed. And this is an absurdity of a world. A person having a little shop, corner shop, is paying actually probably about 15 to 20% of VAT, of consumption tax. Is paying a lot of tax. If you sell a pencil, 20% of that generally goes to tax. But if you're a bank, you don't pay any taxes. And banks are very wealthy by definition. In most of countries of the world, banks are not, the financial sector is not taxed whatsoever. So it's the time, and there's many civil society movements towards that, and the United Nations has a strong stance that it's very important to have adequate taxes, but means for everybody, not just taxing the poor guy on the corner store, but tax everybody, including the financial sector. And we have very good examples like Brazil. Then we have a number of examples too in let me see the slides that come here. Okay. We have very good examples on taxing mineral extraction, which I'm going to go now. But this is a fight. Though progressively more taxes are being put, what we find is that in many cases, still we have countries that are lowering income taxes. And this is a list from 2014, but these are a number of countries. There are very few, but they're still cutting income taxes and corporate taxes. That is inadequate, unless they were extremely high before. But because generally you need to aim, as we're saying, to adequate taxation, but it needs to be from those that have more wealth to those that have less. So you need to be aware of that. And Then there are a number of creative ways to tax a new economic activity, and one of them has been taxing minerals. Many countries, developing countries actually, are at the moment taxing mineral extraction. And let me give you a brilliant example, but there are many. Mongolia was financing a universal child benefit from a little tax on copper exports. And only that allowed a universal child benefit for all children in Mongolia. Zambia, many people from Zambia in this meeting. Zambia has been taxing mineral extraction as well and financing social protection from that. And this graph comes from Zambia, precisely. Since 2007, where some taxes were started to be collected, and suddenly you have a huge rise on revenues, public revenues, because of this taxing mineral exports. And other cases you have in Latin America, a number of countries like Bolivia, they were starting taxing hydrocarbons, fuel and minerals, and then with that have a significant amount of money to develop, to maintain and support the social protection system. In Bolivia, hydrocarbons are paying a universal pension, which is called renta dignidad, dignity rent, dignity pension. It's a universal for all older persons. So these are fantastic, good examples. Huh? And you have many other types of taxes. You also could tax property and inheritance. You could tax tourism, and a number of countries are developing tax on tourism. You could tax remittances and other things. So you have a big avenue of fiscal space there, and it is very important. We go to option 4. Option 4 is only for developing countries, and is increasing aid and transfers. And what we have here, it is a graph, it's a visualization of how income is distributed in the world. And what you have at the end there is the richer countries, and you see they have much more income. They have big bars. And you have here at the front is actually the poorer countries, and they have very little income. And in the middle, you have more income growing up. And then what you have in the wider sense is the classes. So you have the richer classes at the bottom, and on this side here, looking at us, you have the poorer classes, the poorer groups in society, that they have less. So the countries at the very bottom, the very wealthy ones, are, in case you are curious, are the United States, Singapore, and Luxembourg. These are the countries that have more in the world. But why I'm saying this, it is because redistribution from north to south is extremely justified. Because you see, all the wealth is up there. And if you look at here in this side, and you're in a poor country, the amount of money that you can redistribute from the wealthier class here to the poor is limited, because there's not such a difference in income. So yes, you can redistribute some, because very clearly there's more wealthy people, no? But there's a limit. This is how much can you redistribute? Because as we were saying, middle classes in developing countries are low income, and even the wealthy are not so high income, okay? So the justification from north to south transfers of aid is so strong in our world. There are so much disparities, and inequality is growing. So there are all the arguments to have more aid. However, very unfortunately, we know aid is not increasing in our world, because of a number of issues, which we cannot deal here. But in any case, this is not happening. But if you are a developing country, particularly a low-income country, you will go and try to lobby for more transfers and more aid. Now, if this happens, there's an issue of how this aid is invested. And here, this big chart, there are a number of issues with aid, which I'm not going to explain here, and issues of lack of equal distribution. You have some countries that are considered the darlings of donors because there is some type of attachment towards colonial attachment or something, and some countries that are awfully poor and receive very little money. So, this distribution of aid is not done in any equitable manner, etc., etc. But it does not matter. Let's leave that aside. If we look at how aid is spent, this graph is actually very telling, and it comes from a report from the IMF Evaluation Office, a very, very good report. And it's a bit old, but it illustrates very well what we're trying to say. So what happens, what the IMF in this report did is seeing how all the aid and transfers going to sub-Saharan Africa was spent. And of all this money, a third was used to debt reduction. So actually it was coming to the country and immediately did poop, and it went out. It went to pay debt. 36% was used for reserve accumulation. And this we're going to see later. So what happened is actually money was coming into the central bank, but then to have, it was kept as reserves in case of, some macroeconomic imbalance. And this is something that is, very questionable from the point of view of social justice, because many of these sub-Saharan African countries had a situation of food security. People were dying, starving. So why would you keep the money in your central bank just in case, This is very questionable. And the IMF was questioning it too. Yeah? And then third of it, but actually 27% only, was used for real investments in the country of any type. It could be roads, it could be education, health, or whatever. But, it all shows that even if you get aid, you will need to fight that to ensure that it goes towards social protection or SDGs or whatever human investment you want to promote. This is very important. Okay, and I'm going to pass this one. But above all, and I want you to raise your awareness on that, what you need to avoid is that there are transfers from the south to the north. And the reality is that this is what is happening in most countries. Actually, poor southern countries are paying to the north. And the custodian of this line of data is the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. You can download it there. It is in our paper, Fiscal Space for Social Protection, but you can go and check every year what is the evolution. And what you have here, all the numbers in yellow and negative, it means a transfer from south to north. So how this is happening? Well, it's happening, as we were saying, because of debt repayments, because of profit remittances between companies, multinationals that are from the north, and then they take the profits back to the north. It is because of capital markets. Also, many people in the south invest in the north because they think there are better returns. And it happens because of illicit financial flows that we're going to talk next. But this is, of course, unacceptable. Money should be flowing from richer countries to the poor, to the southern countries, not the opposite up. So somehow this is to raise your awareness. For us, it's very difficult to treat that, but you need to be aware of that. Okay, so we go to option 5, and it's very limited to the south-north transfers, and this to fight illicit financial flows. And this is very interesting because this was a topic that 15 years ago, it was kind of subversive to talk about it. Now the IMF talks about it, in a frontal way, because these are illegal activities. You are talking about money laundering, we are talking about, tax evasion, or trade mispricings. These are illegal activities that should not be happening. And as mentioned, now the IMF talks directly about it. And what happens, this is a huge amount of money that it leaves the countries, and when it could be invested in development. And now, you look this little graph there, it comes from an estimation done by UNDP on how it was comparing how much money goes into aid or ODA, and this is the smaller, darker bars, and compared to the illicit financial flows that are a bit lighter, larger bars. And as you see, the money going to aid is a dwarf compared to the money that leaves the country as illicit financial flows. So it's very important to fight that. Now, again, this might not be the work of a social security institution, but however, ministries of finance, if they pretend this is not happening, what they are doing is not doing their job. Because they should be fighting tax evasion, they should be fighting money laundering and other activities that are illegal. Okay, so it's very important to put that into the discussions in national dialogue to accomplish social protection and any other SDG. Okay, let's go to option 6. We're in 6 of 8. Is fiscal reserves. So we were saying before that many countries actually have minerals and so they can use that for national development. And then we have many of those have been told to invest in sovereign wealth funds. And that is a questionable policy too. So what a sovereign wealth fund does is that you collect all the first money that you got from your mineral extraction. It could be fuel, it could be minerals. And then you invest it in capital markets. But why would you do that if you might have people with very low living conditions in your own country? Why to put this money into capital markets, normally in New York, Frankfurt, or Tokyo? You may want to invest in your people there. So that is something you need to question. And the other one is the use of reserves. And we saw before, when talking about aid, that many countries, sub-Saharan countries, that actually had a situation of food security, but they were keeping the money in their central bank, locked there, without being spent. That is also very questionable. Now, what you see is that countries, this is a long-term series, starts in 95, and it measures the amount of foreign exchange reserves that countries are keeping in their central banks. As you see, it's growing and growing and growing, and every time more. So why do the ministries of finance and central banks keep all this money there? And where there are so many development needs? Well, they're doing that as a policy of self-insurance. They are scared. The world is becoming more unstable, so they are scared that, that something can go wrong and they will not be able to react. They are scared also. I talked to many ministers of finance and said, but why are you doing this? And then they confess that they're actually scared of the IMF. If the country goes into imbalance and they don't have reserves to cover the imbalance, they're scared they will have to borrow from the IMF. But you see, this is this is very, very, very wrong and sick reaction. The reality is that, funds, there are a number of standard key rules on how much money will you keep in your central bank, and generally this is understood as 4 months of imports. So, you give yourself breathing space of 4 months, and if there is an imbalance, you will still have reserves, your savings there to pay for 4 months of imports. This is this one, and there's another rule. But I have to tell you, as we were doing this work that you can download on Fiscal Space for social protection, 52 developing countries had many more reserves than 4 months. So they're doing it for self-insurance, but this is a policy that can be questioned, okay? Some more funds can be used to invest in people. Otherwise, they're just there in the central bank, Okay, option 7. So we are 7 of 8 is borrowing. Now, here you have 2 options. It's about debt. Some countries are in a very good position and they can borrow more money, and some do borrow for money. They take loans and they invest them in social protection. And some others, no. They are in a very difficult situation and they have a debt, a growing debt, and they cannot borrow anymore. And in this case, what you need to consider is how can you reduce the amount of debt. And here what you have is a series of countries that they're paying monthly they're paying debt service, they have to pay back to the creditors, and how much are they paying compared to the public health expenditure. And as you see, a number of countries like Mauritius, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Tajikistan, Ukraine, Lebanon, they were paying much more than actually their health budget. So that, of course, is a terrible comparison, because it means that there are many people with needs, but however, the money is going out of the country to pay the creditors. So the good news is that you can restructure your debt. Many countries have renegotiated the debts. It's not done immediately, it takes a few years, but it's a very important issue to do. And more than 60 countries have renegotiated positively their debts and reduced the amount of debt that they had to pay. Some have achieved debt relief and forgiveness, some have done debt swaps, some have repudiated debt, and some have defaulted. And by the way, nothing happened to the countries, like Argentina and Russia. But still, of course, this is a last resort that you don't want to use. What is very important is to realize that the world needs some kind of international mechanism to deal with that. Now, you know that debt is increasing in most countries just now, this year. Are you aware of the debt of your country? Is it increasing? How many people the debt is increasing in your country? 1, 2, many more. I can tell you, 3, many more countries. The debt is increasing massively this year, okay? So this issue, the ideas of thinking about restructuring debt, renegotiating debt, and above all, to create some international mechanism to solve debt problems. Because otherwise, the situation is that developing countries have to go and negotiate with many very powerful creditors. This is very difficult for a country. So if it was some kind of international mechanism that will solve that, and this is proposed even by the IMF, that will be very necessary. Okay, so we go to the last option. And the last option sounds like more abstract, no? A more accommodative macroeconomic framework. So that means having a bit more of tolerance with fiscal deficits and with inflation. Now, everybody thinks that these are evil things, but the reality countries, have varying positions, sometimes have a degree of deficit and another, and what you give, if you get a bit more of accommodative, of more tolerance, is that you get more breathing space for the countries. And this has happened in all the northern countries with the crisis. Actually, they had a more accommodative stance, and from the United States to many European countries. So developing countries should have that too. And let me show you something. This is the inflation rate. Now, we all know that macroeconomic stability by the book will be an inflation below 5%. And we all know that you will have macroeconomic instability if you have more than 18 or 19%. But in the middle, you have this gray area. And this gray area is that it's unclear what is that type of inflation there. It's not the pure by the book, and it's not instability. Now, if you look at what the experts say, the experts have many, many papers. There are many saying that actually a bit of higher rates than 5% is nothing wrong. Actually, economies have had larger growth rates with a bit of inflation because the economy was going fast. And so it is not fully justified. And what is more interesting, even there are IMF papers that defend larger rates of inflation. So why the world has come with this 5% cutoff point? Well, because these are, very often how this happens. But I'm just giving you the intellectual ammunition, to question things. And to realize that governments could have a bit of breathing space. So very often, a key issue that is there is the payment of the wage bill, the salaries of all the civil servants in a country. Every month the government has to do that, no? It's very difficult in many countries. So a bit more of tolerance gives you this breathing space of get your teachers, your doctors, and your social workers. Okay, so recapitulating, there are 8 options. That's the key messages you want to do. And saying when people tell you that there is no funds for social protection or for the SDGs, you can clearly say, no, there are options that we can explore. There are alternatives. If governments are doing austerity, you can go back and say, well, you could think together of some, options. And this is part of a UN message, very strong one, and we are here at your service to help you in case you need. How countries do it? You have to understand, not all countries will be able to do the 8 options. Each country is unique, and some countries can take some options, some countries can take other options. Not all options are valid everywhere. But these are examples of fiscal space strategies of countries. And what they do, generally, they capture a bit of here, a bit of there, a bit of there, a bit of there, a bit of there. And suddenly, when they have before a budget this size, now they have a budget this size. So that is how generally it works. And it is a positive way to move ahead. And this is why national social dialogue is so important for issues of financing and design of social protection, but also financing. Tomorrow morning, you are going to have a plenary that is going to talk on the nitty-gritty of how to do the national dialogue. But it's so important because these decisions are not technocratic decisions that can be taken behind closed doors at the Ministry of Finance. These are decisions that impact the lives of people, of many people, and they must be discussed in national dialogue with employers, with workers, with civil society, with academics, with everybody in a country. And it must be a public, open discussion, because these decisions matter to so many people. And we at the UN, we are very happy to assist you. This is my email. You can write to us, and also my colleague Fabio Duran and Tanim Muzaffar, who is here. And they're all teaching in the courses in this academy. We welcome you to join the academy and join us here, learn more about all these options. And here, if you cannot do it, there are two of the main papers mentioned here. One is the Fiscal Space for Social Protection, and the SDG is translated in French and Spanish. And you also have the ILO World Social Protection Report 2017-19, which is also translated into French and Spanish. Thank you. So I understand that there is an innovative way of putting questions that they are going to come through the screen. And also we can take questions from the floor, from the audience. I see there's a number. Charles, how do you want to do it?
All right, the system is officially open. So if you want to ask your question directly on the Slido, exactly the same way we did it in previous days, you're welcome to do so, and we will actually see the question right in front of you. But we'll also take a few questions from the floor. So we're going to have a mixed approach this morning where we're going to take the live questions, but we're going to take also your question using this system. So I'm going to start with Minister King here with his first question.
Thank you, Isabella. From your lecture, you've touched on certain things that conflict with some information I gathered from a text on governance written by an ancient Italian author. You mentioned about taking from the rich, giving to the poor. That is a distribution of wealth. But I don't know how you juxtapose that with what that author suggested when he said that the role of governments is not to redistribute wealth, but to ensure that individuals keep what belongs to them. And then you also mentioned about the different ways in which governments could finance the social protection. He also cautioned that governments must not impose taxes unless they are absolutely necessary. And you have highlighted up to, I think, 4 different ways in which taxes could be imposed to take from the rich to give to the poor. And also the issue of you questioning or having some concerns about keeping reserves in the central bank. I don't know how we can justify that because with a view that these are necessary to build resilience to cushion financial shocks in the future. That's, all big and successful companies, for example, behave in similar manner. That if you consume all the money you're making, then you'll not be reserving any funds for reinvestment in the economy in the future. So I really want you to shed light on these issues and reconcile them with your own point of view as you've just elucidated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister King. Any other question? I see that there are some coming through the Slido, but yes, please.
Yes, I think you gave us options around the most regressive sort of approaches to financing, as well as those that are not most regressive. At what point do you think, because we see governments taking the options that are most regressive. For example, certain governments have gone for the option of taxing, for example, fuel to support the government finances. What would make a government jump from the most not regressive options for financing to the most regressive that affects the entire population? Because I think that has significant implications on the development of the nation. I was just wondering what would be this that would guide governments to do this. And I think the other thing that you also mentioned, which I think is important, is that while we look at all these options, I think the awareness of the people of a nation in terms of being able to put governments to task in terms of some of these options that you've mentioned. Because when the government comes up and says we are going to tax fuel, more often than not, I think the public is not even aware of what other options are available. And I think this is another area. So in as much as we are here, the technocrats, I think the civil society also needs to be very in touch with this discussion in terms of how do we make the public also aware that they may also be able to ask government, but have you looked at the other options that are available to you before you hit us with this tax on fuel? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
Bonjour madame, c'est Hirosoule de la République du Niger, directeur général de la protection sociale. Nous vous remercions très sincèrement de votre brillant exposé, mais nous avons au passage une question importante à vous poser par rapport à la réduction des dépenses militaires au profit du budget de la protection sociale. Pensez-vous que dans des pays en situation de guerre, où sévit permanemment la nébuleuse Boko Haram, telle que le Niger, est-il possible de réduire les dépenses militaires au profit, n'est-ce pas, du budget de la protection sociale? Merci.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask about the logic behind the removal of fuel subsidies. Your recommendation here is to redistribute the proceeds from having removed fuel subsidies to cover everybody, including the middle class, because otherwise they're being punished. So my question is, what's the logic anyway in proposing the removal of fuel subsidies when it will amount to rises in prices? And if UN is able to bear pressure on governments to remove fuel subsidies, do you have any example in the world where IMF has, in addition to piling pressure on governments to remove fuel subsidies, where they have also encouraged or piled additional pressure on governments to actually remove, redistribute the money? Because I have examples of countries where they have removed fuel subsidies, but yet the monies have become more attractive for other areas of expenditure rather than redistributing to the poor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all the questions that actually have been very interesting. So I'm going to try to answer them in clusters. The questions that you are putting is very interesting because they keep repeated to the places I go. So first, let me put the objective of the governments is to have public policies that benefit the majority of citizens. Now here there are difficult choices to be done, and how you benefit them in the short term, medium term, long term. You know, there are decisions that need to be discussed, and it's part of public policies. But the argument of the United Nations and of the ILO is that it has to be discussed in national dialogue, open to everybody. Part of these public policies for the majority of people, it entails a degree of redistribution from those that have more wealth to those that have less wealth. And this happens in all countries, in all of them. It happens in all of your countries. So there is some system. There are a number of options that are happening in where there is a degree of redistribution. Some countries redistribute a lot, and some countries they redistribute very little, but all of them redistribute something. Now, we were talking at the very beginning about how this is an issue of political will. So that is the thing. Some countries decide to use as much as 50% of their GDP in public policies, and some others decide to have only 20%. That is a public decision, and ultimately it's taken by democratic choices, and the majority of world countries at the moment do have democracies. And things change. Also, this is not a stable decision. Countries do change depending on the governments they have. So the electoral choices do matter. Now, let me go to a small, to some of the nuancing of that, because what you are doing is nuancing coming with different questions. Now, very clearly, countries need to invest in growth issues, need to have adequate investments, so growth will be happening. And so they also need to keep a number of funds into the central bank reserves, as we said. And there is a golden rule for that. We said it was 4.5 months of imports. And these countries do. But actually, what they're doing is much more, as we explained too. So that's what we are questioning. We are questioning the excess. So when you go much more than the rule. Ultimately, my advice to you, these are possessions, but my advice to you is to be ambitious. Look, we were saying at the very beginning how social protection expanded over the last century, and that this was a fight that is not only a fight, it's the fight of our parents, our grandparents, that we're also fighting for a lot. So be ambitious. Think of systems that will be universal and for all. Now, this might take time to happen, but still you keep the objective ambitious. And in the case of the fuel subsidies that several of you have asked, you see, the key thing, I mean, you can question why to remove the fuel subsidy to start with, because in some cases, actually, it already has some positive social impacts. It makes the transport prices cheaper and prices cheaper, and it's universal, it's for everybody. So yes, you could keep it, but you could also use it and to do a universal social protection system that will be for everybody. Not just for the poor. But of course, you will start always by the poor because these people are suffering a lot. But you will include the poor and more groups. There was a very interesting question from Niger also, saying that, of course, you do have a situation, it's a fragile state, and you do have a situation in which there is armed conflict. Very clearly, when you have an armed conflict, you don't cut defense expenditure because that's a different situation. But because we had to pass many slides quickly, but one of the slides I was showing, actually it was countries that they had more defense spending than health spending at a time where there was more than, I forgot, but I think it's 15 years of an unarmed conflict. No? But so you don't have a situation of armed conflict is when you can question that. If you have a situation of armed conflict, you will not question it because you do have a complicated situation in your country. Again, it's always time the same. Each country is a different case. So you need to balance all the answers to ensure that they are considering and tailoring the best solution for your country. It's not a golden recipe. But what is important is to explore them all, and then you might explore it and say, yeah, but this is not feasible here. So then it's dropped, and you look to the next option. But that is how generally it is done. Now, we have a number of questions here.
Maybe while you're looking at the question, I would like to go back to you and ask you to maybe react to the 8 different options that were presented by Isabel. So I will ask Charles to activate the system. She presented, and all of you will be invited to actually select one of the options. 8 options were presented as part of the presentation. Maybe some of them are extremely relevant for your countries, maybe others are less relevant. So what we would like to know from you, which option seems more promising for the extension of fiscal space in your country. So you will be invited to answer this question. All right, so far we have received 6 different answers. I will be expecting you to, all of you to provide an answer. One at a time, exactly. And then I will ask Isabel to react to the result of the poll here. All right, back to you, Isabel. I don't know if you want to react to the poll you're seeing here. Then we're going to show the question once again that we had like in the Slido.
Very good. That's actually a very interesting poll. So each country is I come back to the same issue. Each country is different, and I think what is important is to debate that in national dialogue. But I'm very glad to see that your perception is that a lot of it comes from improving contributions, because that means that you are hoping that social insurance can be extended. This is actually a very important avenue, and to extend to the informal sector and ensure that people become formalized with better contracts, with decent work conditions. That is actually a main, very positive way to move forward. So, very good. And perhaps I can get the Slido questions because I don't remember them.
If you can move it back, Charles. There we go, they're back. Huh?
Well, they are very interesting questions and very diverse. So I very much appreciate all of them, wherever you have sent them from. Look, it's very interesting that you have picked this idea of redistribution from wealthy to poorer. You don't need to put it this, it is true that all societies have elements of redistribution, but you don't need to put it that way. You can simply put it in terms of building social protection systems. Social protection systems are redistributive by nature. You have always redistribution. In social insurance, you have redistribution from those that are healthy and working towards those that have retired. In health insurance, for instance, is the current people that are healthy and working are paying for those that are sick. And someday you become sick, So there's an element of redistribution in social insurance. As it is from social transfers, very clearly social assistance. And this happens, this is the institution, or one of the institutionalized ways, one of them, because there are many other ways that redistribution happens through education policies, health policies, any other policy. But, that you can do it. So, of course, as ILO, my advice is that you put it in terms of social protection. And the achievement of the SDGs, of the Sustainable Development Goals, does require degrees of redistribution. And the world is becoming more and more unequal, and it's because many countries are not doing that. Okay, then some people actually, they were commenting on the problem of increasing VAT or consumption taxes. That is correct. Many countries are doing that. This is an inadequate source of taxation for social protection. Why? Because you see, the poor and the rich pay the same. If the poor go and buy a sack of rice and the rich go and buy a sack of rice, they both pay the same tax on the rice. However, for the wealthy, this is nothing. They don't think twice. For the poor, this is very important. If you pay 20% tax on that, it's a lot of burden for them. They could buy much more rice if it was not that, okay? So you have to be very aware of VAT. You try to other tax mechanisms, not consumption taxes. There's some questions, which are the 8 options might be easier than others? It depends how it is phrased or framed. You frame it on contentious manners, they don't happen, but most countries are, you see, countries were showed at the end country strategies, and what happens, most countries are doing a variety of them. They're fighting money laundering, they're increasing taxation, adequate taxation, not excessive, but adequate taxation. They're increasing contributions of social security, the collection of them, and bringing more people towards the formal sector. They're using all the possible options. And that's generally what countries do, use a bit of all of the options.
May I suggest that we take a final round of verbal question here in the room to maybe close this plenary session? So I will take 3 final questions. I will start with you, sir. Please have the first question. You already asked a question.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis sénégalais. Au Sénégal, on vient d'élaborer une nouvelle stratégie de protection sociale basée sur l'approche cycle de vie. Et au niveau de la politique de financement, on a eu à proposer quelques réformes. Premièrement, l'abandon progressif des subventions générales, des produits alimentaires, et de l'électricité et du carburant pour mieux orienter les ressources dans le financement de la protection sociale. Et aussi, on a proposé la mise en place de la caisse autonome de protection sociale universelle qui servira de canal pour organiser le financement. Et pour le financer, on a même proposé d'augmenter un peu la TVA sociale qui est de 18%. C'est que selon l'UEMOA, la TVA est fixée à 20%. Donc on a proposé d'augmenter à 19% pour utiliser le surplus à financer la caisse autonome de protection sociale universelle. Bon, selon vous, je voudrais savoir, est-ce que vous pensez que c'est pertinent, les réformes qu'on a eu à proposer pour financer le secteur de la protection sociale? Je vous remercie.
Good morning, and thanks for the wonderful presentation. My name is Chinyere Mekan, and I work for the ILO Abuja office. My question is, considering in developing countries, especially mine, which I'm very aware of, people are apprehensive of paying taxes because they do not see value for money. How can we advocate for increase of taxes when people are already not paying what we currently have?
All right, final question, final opportunity. All right, so back to you, sir.
Yes, there was a mention of the reduction of corruption as a form of expanding fiscal space. I just wanted to find out whether there are specific examples of this and whether that reduction and the expansion of fiscal space has resulted in extension of social security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, very interesting questions. There are good examples of everything of the different areas. Actually, in recent years, it has been a lot of exposure of corruption cases, and in many, many countries, at high income and low income and middle income. So, and this is all positive. Of course, when it happens, it's a scandal and it's an erosion on the credibility of governments, but with time is the positive thing to happen, because, you expose, the guilt persons, and then, the funds are not continue to be siphoned out, and it is remain with the government. So in the long term, this is the right thing to do. So there are many cases, all high income, middle income, numerous countries, almost daily we're seeing a scandal of corruption scandals on the news. Somebody else also asked about examples of a country that will have renegotiated debt or reduced debt for social protection. There are many cases. Let me give you one example. There was Ecuador. Ecuador actually did a very interesting and praised maneuver with its debt, which you can actually check more in our publications, but actually with this savings from debt servicing, actually paid many, expanded social protection significantly. And like it, many other countries have both from high income to low income. This gentleman was asking me about the financing strategy of your government. Well, it's very difficult for me to validate something here. You need to see the details and the nitty-gritty of how it is done. In general, using fuel subsidies for universal social protection is a correct thing. It's just, it takes time. You need to be aware of that. And VAT, you need to be cautious, because VAT tends to be regressive. So that's not so adequate. But this requires seeing the whole strategy, not just hearing two words, because these are macroeconomic decisions that have a large implication, in everybody. What else? Well, I think this is generally it. Of course, there are many more questions that they're difficult to ask, but we have a coffee break now, and which is going to, or we can continue the discussion. We have a session this afternoon also on financing social protection, and tomorrow, which will be presented to everybody, so you are most welcome to continue the discussion there. Thank you very much.